The airport hall in Athens was a scene of both exhaustion and relief. Dozens of men and women stepped out of the arrival gates after days in detention in Israel, some limping slightly, others blinking against the flash of cameras. The most recognizable among them was Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate activist whose detention had become the latest flashpoint in the Gaza crisis. On Monday evening, Israel confirmed that it had deported 171 activists, including Thunberg, who had been arrested at sea while sailing as part of the global Flotilla. The group's stated mission was to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza and to symbolically challenge Israel's long-standing maritime blockade of the Palestinian enclave. The deportees were met by a large, cheering crowd at Athens International Airport. Many had waited for hours with banners and flags, chanting slogans in support of Gaza. The moment Thunberg appeared at the arrival gate, phones were raised high to capture the images. There was a brief hush as she approached the microphones, her face pale but determined. Under international law, states have a legal obligation to act to prevent and to stop a genocide from happening. That means ending complicity, applying real pressure, and ending arms transfers. We are not seeing that. We are not even seeing the bare minimum from our governments. Her words cut through the noise of the airport, underlining that for her and many of the activists, the focus was not on their own detention, but on the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. The flotilla had set sail from ports in southern Europe under the banner of the global Flotilla, or GSF. Its organizers, a coalition of pro-Palestinian activists, humanitarian workers and lawyers, said they wanted to deliver basic aid supplies and to bring international attention to what they describe as the collective punishment of Gaza's 2 million residents. The convoy was intercepted in international waters about 60 nautical miles off the coast by Israeli naval forces. Israel's defense ministry defended the action, saying it was enforcing the maritime blockade that has been in place since 2007 to prevent arms smuggling to militant groups like Hamas. Officials in Jerusalem called the flotilla a political provocation masquerading as humanitarian aid. But the incident immediately drew criticism from human rights groups and governments in Europe. The returning activists' testimonies given at the airport in Athens and later to reporters painted a stark picture of their days in custody. A French participant described being blindfolded and forced to lie face down for hours during the initial arrest. A German activist said she was terrified and disoriented because she did not know where she was being taken. Several said that upon arrival in detention facilities, they were ordered to change into grey prison-issue jumpsuits and had no access to their own clothes or personal belongings. Many spoke of overcrowded cells, insufficient bedding, and limited access to food and drinking water. Some described conditions so harsh that a few detainees went on hunger strikes in protest. A young activist from Italy told reporters, "Even those of us who did not join the hunger strike hardly ate. The food was inadequate and we were constantly thirsty. This is the first day we are actually drinking enough water and eating a proper meal." Women in particular said they suffered from lack of privacy and constant anxiety. One French activist said the most frightening aspect was not knowing where we were or how long we would be kept. Yet despite these accounts of mistreatment, almost every activist insisted on the same message: we are not the story is Gaza. At the airport, relatives and supporters held up signs reading "Free Gaza, End the Blockade and Welcome Home." Many wept as they embraced returning friends and family. Others listened quietly as the deportees recounted their experience. A local Greek volunteer who had come to welcome them said, "We stood here for hours because we wanted to show them they are not alone. What they did was an act of conscience." The airport's arrival hall buzzed with journalists, camera crews, and human rights observers. Outside, police maintained a light presence, but the atmosphere remained peaceful. The sense of relief was tempered by continued concern for the 138 activists still held in Israel, whose cases have not yet been resolved. Israel's government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, maintains that the naval blockade is essential to its national security. Officials argue that opening maritime access to Gaza without Israeli oversight would allow Hamas and other militant groups to import weapons. Israel also firmly rejects accusations of genocide or systematic targeting of civilians. Foreign Ministry spokespersons insist that the flotilla's participants were treated according to the law and that any allegations of abuse are unfounded. Legal scholars, however, remain divided. Some note that under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, intercepting vessels in international waters raises serious questions of legality unless there is a demonstrable security threat. Human rights advocates argue that collective restrictions on civilians in Gaza, especially restrictions on aid delivery, violate international humanitarian law. From Athens, a reporter described the atmosphere in vivid terms. She said the mood was very emotional, at times overwhelming. Families were still trying to calm down distraught relatives. What struck me, she reported, was how many of the activists, even in the first moments after their release, wanted to talk not about their suffering, but about the suffering of people in Gaza. They kept saying again and again, "We are not the story." According to her, the accounts of conditions in detention were really disturbing, from physical abuse to lack of basic necessities like food, water, and hygiene. The incident has drawn attention back to the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The enclave has endured a strict blockade for over a decade and a half. Imports and exports are heavily restricted, and movement of people in and out is tightly controlled. Aid groups say these measures have crippled the local economy and left the population dependent on international assistance. The United Nations and multiple NGOs have warned of severe shortages of food, clean water, and medical supplies. Periodic escalations of conflict have further destroyed infrastructure and limited humanitarian access. This is the context in which the flotilla organisers say they launched their mission to carry not only basic goods but also a political message that the blockade is unsustainable and that international law obliges states to protect civilian populations. Thunberg, best known for her global climate strikes, has increasingly spoken out about the Gaza conflict in the past 2 years. Her decision to join the flotilla marked a shift from her usual focus on climate change to a more direct act of civil disobedience in a conflict zone. Her arrest and subsequent deportation brought immediate international attention to the flotilla's cause. Supporters praised her courage. Critics accused her of aligning with a one-sided political agenda. Regardless of political opinion, her speech in Athens was widely reported, especially her indictment of international inaction. We are not seeing the bare minimum from our governments. Her framing of the issue as a legal and moral obligation to prevent genocide has sparked debate across Europe, where many governments face pressure from both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian constituencies. The Israeli Navy's interception of the flotilla is not unprecedented. Since the 2010 Mavi Marmara incident, in which several activists were killed during a confrontation at sea, Israel has consistently acted to block maritime convoys headed for Gaza. Israeli officials stress that humanitarian aid can enter Gaza through approved land crossings after security inspections. They argue that unsanctioned flotillas serve propaganda purposes and risk confrontation at sea. A senior Israeli security official, speaking to local media, said the decision to deport most detainees was made to de-escalate the situation and avoid prolonged diplomatic disputes. Israel has denied reports of abuse in detention, saying that all activists were treated humanely and provided with necessary food and medical care. Several European lawmakers have called for an independent investigation into the activists' allegations of mistreatment. Human rights groups have urged both Israel and flotilla organisers to ensure that future actions avoid endangering lives. The incident has also strained relations between Israel and some of its Western partners, who see the blockade as an impediment to humanitarian relief but remain committed to Israel's security. In Greece, government officials offered support services to the returned activists, but avoided making strong political statements, reflecting Athens' careful balancing act in its Middle East diplomacy. For the activists, the experience of arrest and detention has become part of the story they want to tell. But they continue to insist that their personal ordeal should not eclipse the suffering of those they tried to help. A Spanish participant put it this way: "We were blindfolded, kept on the ground for hours, given little food or water. But what we endured is nothing compared to what families in Gaza go through every day. Many of the deportees have pledged to continue campaigning for an end to the blockade and for what they call real political pressure on governments to uphold international law." The flotilla incident highlights the persistent tension between state security measures and civilian humanitarian action in the protracted Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It underscores the challenges faced by international law in situations where governments claim urgent security needs while critics allege collective punishment. For Israel, the episode reinforces its long-standing policy of controlling Gaza's